So up next, we have Greg Hoyt. And Greg has been an entrepreneur for over 20 years and is currently an investing entrepreneur in Gather Venture Group, which invests in food and beverage startups. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Greg Hoyt.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Really grateful to be here at Twin Cities Startup Week. It's very important for me. Sorry, I'm going to open my water. To be participating in this because I've been a startup person for 25 years. And I spent a good portion of that time in my career feeling somewhat isolated or lonely or alone. And resources that exist here in Minnesota that are available to entrepreneurs, to founders, to leadership teams and startup people are remarkable, and many of the valuable ones have come about in the last number of years, which is very encouraging. So it's great to be able to be participating. Thank you to everyone who's here in the auditorium and to anyone who's online. A couple of housekeeping items. One, I'm Irish, so I talk a lot. And so it's wonderful to be up here by myself with the ability to talk because I have a few things to say. Two, I never assume or presume that what I have to say, it really amounts to a whole lot to everybody. I hope it connects with somebody and it does so in a meaningful way. Three, whatever I have to share is a reflection of what I know thus far. I certainly don't know everything, and I would hate to come off as an authority in certain areas, but I do have some experience, and I think I can share some valuable things. Finally, I have a tendency to have a word that is in my head and just out of reach, and I can't grab it. So forgive me if there's a bit of a pause sometimes. It's not you, it's me. So I also do not have any visual aids. I purposely prepared to talk about some things without any PowerPoints or any visual aids for a couple reasons. One, I'm not very good at putting them together. I do, however, have people in my midst who are excellent at putting them together. But I also thought, this Twin Cities Startup Week has been, there's a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of reference tools available to go back to. And I would prefer just to be more conversational, actually. And so to that end, I'll speak for a while, and then we can have some questions. So I called this this talk "To Fund or Not to Fund," startup from an investor's perspective as it relates to food, consumer packaged goods, and what I and my partners refer to as experiential food. And before I get into that, just some background for context. I was introduced to the idea of being an entrepreneur almost 30 years ago from a business that I worked for, and I had no idea that going this route was something that was even possible. But it was a business that I worked for that inspired me to join an industry. That industry is coffee, and to be an entrepreneur. And I set out to just go for it, to start a coffee business. Did so, and realized a number of things along the way without a ton of support from anybody outside of my immediate family, from whom I received a great deal of support. And when we needed funding, I figured I'd either just borrow it or I would just put in some more of our savings. So the funding mechanism for my my starting as an entrepreneur was really, I'd say, jagged, which was very unstrategic, and it was very it was rather haphazard. And at the time, that didn't mean a whole lot. In other words, it didn't hurt at the time. When it really felt like poor planning was years down the road. And one thing I would say with the, especially in and around food, with the notion of funding a business at the beginning, or funding it for a period when that period might be for a need for growth, or a need to fill a PO, or a need to even seek out an acquisition. The strategy around how that happens, the mechanisms around how that funding may occur, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to be very, very thoughtful. I got lucky because as things progressed, I had a coffee business which I grew over about 10 years. Through acquisition, we acquired 4 different businesses, and then I exited that business. When it was time, when I was contemplating exiting the business, is when the some of the challenges that I had not contemplated with the means by which I was funding some of that growth really came to light. And to actually record a return on some of the capital that I had put in, and to ascertain what was going to amount to a successful exit for me meant that it was an unattainable sale number for the business, and it was a business which provided an opportunity for me to work for myself. I would say that it was largely a lifestyle business, but it was also one that could have used a lot more strategic thinking around how capital was deployed into the business. And that was a valuable lesson. I thought at the time that my next business that I started, I would take care of all that by simply using other people's money. So, in other words, my exit was not all that successful. The next one, I'll make it successful. I'll use other people's money. I'll use some of my own. And I actually went on and started another business in the same industry, and we funded it with our own. The challenge with seeking other people's money is I didn't know whose money to seek necessarily. And therein lies the importance of an ecosystem or a cohort or relationships with trusted people whom you can go to for information about what you do. How do you seek capital? And of course, we had the best business in our category ever. We were the smartest, most innovative with what we were attempting to achieve, and so the world should come to us. And that's not, it's not how things go. And so we sought out. I've always preferred to work with partners. It's how I roll. I have a background in music. I have a degree in music, and I've always played well with others in a setting like that. So, with a partner seeking investment, we created what amounted to the greatest deck in the history of pitch decks, and couldn't fathom why it wasn't relatable. And we were fortunate in that we did find some outside capital, and I learned another great funding lesson at that time, and that was the amount that we thought we were in need of for the plan that we had, and it was a well thought out plan. We were offered roughly half and encouraged to do the best we could with what we were offered. The good news is that individual is still an investor with me, is still someone whom I consider a close friend, and this was about 10 years ago. We did make use of that half, and it did turn out to be better than what we were seeking. And that was a very valuable lesson that I learned when, in the last 2 years, I made a pivot from being an operating entrepreneur to being an investing entrepreneur. And the reason for starting Gather Venture Group was not necessarily because I know a ton about venture investing. I know a ton about people and character and brands and products and quality of things that we put in our mouths, I think. I know a ton about finding partners. But it was because of what I discovered when I tried to go fundraise 10 years ago. And that is, what the hell? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? In a part of the country that is so rich in resources, human resources, who have expertise in and around food, is so rich in education, is so interested in things that are happening, supporting local and upcoming things. I just didn't know where to go, and therefore, it's a tyranny of the entrepreneur. I figured, well, I'll start something to address that, what might be an opportunity. So 2 years ago, started Gather Venture Group. We are set up as a venture fund. I'm not even supposed to say that because SEC regulations require that I not overtly solicit, and I'm not soliciting anything from anyone, okay? But we are also a management company. We have a portfolio of 6 businesses. I have an operating partner working with me, and our aim has been to be the capital source that I was looking for 10 years ago. And that is that's the problem that we're solving for, if you will. And in the time that we have been operating Gather Venture Group, and in our journey of finding our 6 portfolio companies, a couple things came to light. One was our objective has been, and it still is, to elevate and to be a key part of the food and beverage ecosystem here in Minnesota. And in starting, I figured that we would direct all of our investment towards Minnesota-based businesses. And we have, but we've also invested in 2 businesses outside of Minnesota. And the reason is they're great businesses. We actually have partners. We need to be seeking out the best opportunities to create the best return for our partners. And some of those businesses exist outside of Minnesota. But guess what doesn't exist outside of Minnesota? The best resources in the world. Those are right here. And some of those resources are the businesses that haven't yet started. Some of those resources are going to produce the businesses that have not yet been started, and the businesses that will become excellent. So our objective and our mandate of investment in Minnesota businesses has, as things do, has evolved into adjacency to Minnesota for whatever business we choose to invest in. So we have resource-rich, capital wanting to be more engaged, and a very eager market here in Minnesota to be on the stage. And Allison from Grow North. Grow North is one of those organizations that has become so vital to our ecosystem that wasn't here 10 years ago when I really needed them. Has a saying about now, this is our right to win, meaning that I'm sure that at least through the food and ag track this week, there's been mention or discussion of Boulder and Austin and other such places. And they have their own wonderful qualities, but they do not have what we have here resource-wise for food. We have all of the attributes of a great market. And so the last 2 years have geared me up and geared up others around me. And most people watching here who are engaged in food and ag are also geared up for us to have our rightful place on the map. And it's not because we're lacking in anything that we're not there. It's because we just haven't gotten there yet, and we are on our way. So for Gather, what we have identified is the resources that we have available to businesses also contribute to this ecosystem that can create and will create the next great businesses. Excuse me. So in a resource-rich, capital-rich, but maybe capital hesitant market like this one, what do? We keep making what it is that we are advocating for and what we're investing in and where we need investment more attractive than any other investment opportunity. One thing we found when we were looking to start Gather and get some validation and even seek some capital was we were tugging on the sleeves of all the same people who everyone is going to for capital. They tended to be rich old guys. And, trying to convince somebody who's already been convinced, who's already trying to be convinced of an alternative investment, or to be not stymied by the opportunities that could exist in a startup landscape. It was not as fruitful as we thought it may be. What we discovered was the real capital and the resource, the financial resources that I believe are going to get us to that vaunted right to win space that we need to be in is with the next generation, and that's rich people who aren't rich yet. I would say that it's younger folks, millennials, who are interested and willing to and needing to direct investment into alternative opportunities, like exploring being an angel, like looking at an individual company that they can identify with and work with, like looking at a pooled fund where they might direct some resources. And those resources could come from an IRA or a 401k account, not necessarily somebody who's just, writing checks intermittently based on criteria that may have been relevant, 30 years ago or something. capital sources are really valuable. I'm not throwing shade on any of them. I'm just saying that a lot of us, and I've learned in the last couple of years, as we've talked about the lack of capital flow throughout our ecosystem, are kind of looking to some of the same sources, and we should be looking, I think, more closely inward. And I don't mean looking at ourselves, I mean looking at the next generation of wealth, and whatever that may look like. And I think it's really exciting that there are resources and groups available for younger people to, and I consider myself younger, I'm not a millennial, but to look for ways to contribute to a fruitful ecosystem. My topic is to fund or not to fund. And what that means for me is something that I've seen a lot of in the last couple of years regarding our approach with Gather to look at investment in potential portfolio companies. We've met a number of founders, entrepreneurs who actually just need help. They don't necessarily need money. Or they don't understand what taking on money looks like or represents. And the joy of being an entrepreneur and creating a business that is for a lifestyle or that can generate jobs and can maybe even, disrupt something that's out there, can be had, and the contribution doesn't have to be the result of taking on someone else's money, taking on growth capital, and going that route. And the permission to tell somebody that you can take a much longer time horizon to build a business that you've started in a way that suits you is something that I find, I've felt it as a startup entrepreneur myself, and I've seen it in the eyes of some of the people who we've met, that is what I must do because that's what I read about in Inc. magazine or whatever it is. And that's not necessarily true of everyone. And I wanted to make sure to get across with the to fund or not to fund, the permission for a startup, the permission for a founder, for an entrepreneur, to not take a growth approach that requires capital or investment from somebody, but the permission to take your own time and create something that is more indicative of who you are. I think in a way I kind of did that, and that's where some of the capital stack from the early days of what I was trying to do. That's how that led to really not getting a meaningful return on what I was trying to achieve. And so to fund or not to fund, the good news for people, for businesses, for entrepreneurs who are looking for funding options, we have more of them now here in Minnesota. We don't have enough of them now. We are getting more of them. And the more things like Twin Cities Startup Week, and the more that there's interest in younger people in participating in what's happening, the closer we are to leading the discussion and seeing our right to win, where, again, at least in food, where Boulder and Austin and other parts of the country have had their moment, we will be able to have our time to shine. I am more than happy to open up to any questions or comments or anything that anybody may have. Again, I wasn't soliciting investment into my fund, I promise. Yes.
Given your experience starting as an operator, how does that influence your investment strategy today?
Thank you. The question was, given my experience as an operating entrepreneur, did you ask how does that inform or influence? Yeah, me as an investing entrepreneur. I would say there's a couple things. One, I have deep empathy for a founder, for someone sitting across the table from me. I have deep empathy for the uncertainty and for the challenges of having actually taken the leap. I also, as I alluded to earlier, have some experience in both taking on investment and experience in not taking on investment from somebody else. And while I'm not the person who can, make a decision for someone, I always ask them, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to continue on seeking outside capital for something that's probably a dream of yours? It could be your first dream, it could be your 23rd dream. So that has helped tremendously. I think that, and again, what I said at the beginning was this is a culmination of my experience so far. I sure hope that I'm doing what I'm doing for a long time because I love it and I'm getting better at it. I can and will provide guidance for an entrepreneur to a certain point, and learning together with that entrepreneur for those next points is actually what excites me. So I would say that to answer the question, more than anything, it's my empathy. I'm not a quantitative fund person. I'm more a qualitative operations-minded investor into a business. Yes.
You mentioned how sometimes when you are talking to an entrepreneur, they don't necessarily know what comes with outside investment. And could you just share a little bit about the kinds of things you're thinking of or caution them on?
Yeah, I'd say the first is if I as an investor have a fiduciary obligation to those who have put, and my own money, I've invested my own money too, to see to it that we have every opportunity to get a maximum return. And the first step in that is doing extensive due diligence on the business. That oftentimes is surprising how long that diligence list is. It takes time, and it can get deeply personal. So the process is one, and then two, the obligation that entrepreneur and I now have to people whom I have a fiduciary obligation to. There must be an understanding that that's where we're headed here. Things need to be seen through a strategic lens that ultimately benefits the venture and the business before it benefits a personal desire or drive. The commitment that the entrepreneur, the founder, has to that endeavor solely is really, really key to us getting the return that we need to get. And I think those are some things that aren't totally thought through, and that's okay, because it's exciting to actually break through and get there. And then finally, the lesson that I learned, where if we can use less capital to achieve what it is that maybe we can even achieve together, we as a capital partner, you as the entrepreneur, you may be giving up less than you thought you had to. I'm risking less, and our outcome could be a greater achievement, because I am somebody who believes that that having here's one of those moments, that having not having everything that you think you want allows you to help solve problems. Think Apollo 13. That's what I meant. Anything else? Thank you for letting me share my experience, and for the time that you've offered me. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks so much, Greg. I actually have a question for you.
Oh, shoot.
What has been your favorite part of being an entrepreneur, and how is that different from being an investor in your eyes?
Well, I am an entrepreneur, investor.
Yeah.
So I think what you're asking is from what I was doing before I'm doing now. I think my favorite part was literally remember I had shared earlier that I have a background in music, and I think riffing and making things up and realizing that what we just made up actually happened and people like it and it's really cool, or what we just made up completely made no sense and it was stupid and everyone hated it. I think that those emotions and that it's a fuel. I'm not going to say it's a drug necessarily, but it's a fuel.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience that can really relate to having that story of like trying to figure out like how they're going to get fundraising or whether or not that's the next right step for them. So I definitely think there's definitely people in the audience, including myself, that can really relate to your story. So let's give another warm round of applause to Greg Hoyt.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.